You've got what's happening in industry within each state, kind of driving what is the output and what's being produced and grown. And so it's that ability to have feet on the ground, right? A feedback loop. We've got retailers telling us what we need to talk about. We've got brands telling us what we need to talk about. And then we just have submissions. You guys are missing the point here, right? Like, here, Leafly, you need to cover this. This is a new strain. Why is that not in your database?
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields, and with me, as always, is Kellen Finney. This week, we got a very special guest, Yoko Miyashita, CEO of Leafly. Yoko, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Excited to have you here. Kellen, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, Brian. Really excited to talk to Yoko. Really excited to dive into Leafly. It was one of my favorite platforms forever back in the day in the early days when I had to figure out what strain was and some of the background about it. So really excited to dive into their company and all the cool things they're doing now. And it's also really nice to have a West Coaster on the podcast again today too. How are you doing, Brian?
Yeah, that is true. I'm very excited to talk to Yoko. We've got a lot of topics to talk about today, and I think it's important to identify the fact that it is possible to be located physically on the West Coast, but have your heart and maybe some of your family members interested in being on the East Coast. So I understand that kind of leads to a little challenge in selecting a coast of maybe where you're feeling. So Yoko, if you had to choose East Coast, West Coast?
Left Coast forever. Sorry.
Don't apologize to me. We're just going to edit that part out. So Yoko, before we dive in, for our listeners unfamiliar, you can give a little background about yourself and how you found your way to the cannabis space.
You bet. And I just want to, before we kick off, I just want to convince Kellen that we don't want to just be your old favorite. Like, we want to be your new favorite. We want to be your current favorite. We want to be your go-to at Leafly. All right, let me kick off here. A little bit about my background. I've been here with the organization for 5 years. And just a little bit of background. Prior to coming to Leafly, I'm actually a lawyer by training. And sort of the secret of cannabis is there are a lot. And I think it's really a function of really, right, like understanding opportunity in this space is understanding the regulatory structure. Highly fragmented across 50 states. You got to figure out where and how you can move to actually drive and create opportunity. But I spent actually about 15 years in private practice and with a digital media company, and originally came to Leafly as the general counsel in 2019. I'm here in Seattle watching First Direct State come online, and I've done a fair amount of public advocacy work over the course of my tenure and as a general counsel. And I was just like, that's my next job. I got to be in this space. It is so interesting, and how often like the privilege and opportunity to build an industry and watching that develop, it was just sort of in the back of my mind as I was navigating that. And I couldn't have, like, it's just one of those serendipitous moments where you're like, cannabis, media, property, brand, so well respected, needs their first general counsel. And it was just sort of divine intervention of like, it fell out of the sky in my backyard. And that was 5 years ago. And I took over this role as CEO in 2020. So it's been just over 4 years hanging out with this amazing team, really trying to navigate and help consumers and navigate this really interesting space, right? And it really comes from, we really think about all of the opportunity, all of the complexity comes in this magical plant. And if we can help unlock the power and magic of that for consumers, this is where we create value. And we really do that at the intersection of retailers, consumers, and brands. And that's what we've been really focused on, helping consumers navigate that journey and connecting them to the people along that journey to help fulfill what they want out of this plant.
So I would assume when you first took the role, you had a feeling about excitement coming in. This is where I'm going to add some value. Here's a low-hanging fruit. Fast forward 5 years later, obviously you've learned a ton. Is there one aspect that surprised you the most when you first got started, just based on where you originally thought it would be?
I really liken being in this space to those nesting dolls, right? Like, it is like you open something up and yet another layer emerges, and it's sort of the mad like constant peeling the layer of this onion to find something new at each and every level. And again, I really root that in the magic and power of the plant. But I think what really blew my mind, especially from and I'll just put my lawyer's hat on for a second, compliance. And not just the importance of compliance, we get that, but sort of an innate understanding that as we drive this transition, as we try to change hearts and minds, as we try to defeat 100 years of stigma around this plant, how we're going to get there as a legal industry is through this emphasis and respect for compliance. Now, there are plenty of folks in this space of like, we've gone way overboard. The cost of compliance is killing this industry. I completely understand that perspective, but it doesn't change, right, that commitment to compliance and our need to work together to evolve that to a place where we say this is reasonable. It achieves our policy objectives of keeping consumers safe, but also lets operators thrive and grow, because that's what this is ultimately about, right? We're pulling this out of the legacy industry. We're transitioning, trying to bring as many people along as we can. We're not going to get there if we choke the life out of everyone moving in this space.
Could you kind of elaborate on some of like the steps that Leafly is taking to help your guys' customers through this compliance journey that is a giant minefield, if you will?
If you think about where we're rooted and where we started, and I'm so glad you mentioned sort of how much you relied on our strains database at the outset. Our mission is rooted in education and information. And like what happened as a result of prohibition, you lock down information. You actually suppress discovery, you suppress research, you suppress this ability to learn around this by trying to shove it under, layers and layers and layers of prohibition. But I think for us, it's how do you actually start to surface that education and information? And it starts everything from, we think about this from a data and science piece to defeat the stigma around it, to then starting to help you particularize that journey. Because where you are you at the outset? Are you still in this, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? I have no idea what you can smoke it. What are all these form factors? To, hey, I've been slowly emerging entering this space and trying out different new form factors, down to your experts who are like, I know what works for me. I know what my cannabinoid profile is. I know which terpenes work, and really trying to dial into that specific experience based on what you are looking for out of the plant at any given time. It's about leveraging education and information that is emerging in real time to help you refine that journey and discovery.
There's a ton of information to unpack there. So I guess we should just start from like a consumer standpoint. Would I begin to Google and I would search OG Kush strain in Maryland? Would I be more general, more specific? How would that work?
We think about Leafly as we're going to meet you where you are. You might know what that presumes you know what an OG Kush strain is. You might be wondering, if you're further up the funnel, you are like, what the heck is THC? What is this and what is making me high? And so we're here to, and that, that is, given our 14 years of publishing in this space, we do manage to capture a lot of that original intent through SEO. Why is that? Because we're high authority. We've published a lot. We've really delivered against our mission of educating consumers, and we'll try to capture you wherever you are in your level of sophistication around the plant.
How do you gather all that information and keep it clean and accurate as information evolves and customer preferences go and lingo changes? How do you keep all that information clean and then accurate for the consumer who's searching and then meeting them where they are?
I think especially in the digital space, which we occupy, that is foundational. And there's, again, this breaks up in so many different ways. Like I think about this from very top of funnel, right? News and learn information, our basic articles. How do we keep them refreshed? How do you understand what THC is? How do you understand what CBD is? How do you understand how CBD and THC work together? And making sure that what we've published 10 years ago is now being refreshed with new information coming in. The other thing we've had to think about at that top of funnel, we used to actually do quite a bit of the politics coverage, but that's shifted over time. Why? Because mainstream media has picked up that work, right? When I started, New York Times didn't have a cannabis writer. At its peak, they had 2 full-time staffers covering the cannabis beat. All right, if New York Times is now going to cover this is an area that we probably don't need to cover. But what else is very unique within the cannabis culture, within the cannabis consumption space that we do need to help inform you about? That's at one level, but you're opening up this can around data at the store level, right? Menus. But even further down at the product level And like what you'll see in this space is a ton of companies, a lot like ours, POS companies, e-com embed companies. And we are all trying to crack this nut around how do we have clean data? Because that's the foundation to giving consumers confidence that the product that they are purchasing is the one that they want, the one that they're looking for. And we've been trying to crack this as long as I've been here. We don't have a UPC code, right? Like, where's the uniformity? And if I am new to this space and I'm thinking about, I'll actually use a real life example. I'm one of those middle-aged cannabis consumers who found my way back to the plant through topicals. Love topicals. When I first started shopping for them, I'd buy a jar at my local store, but I'd go back 2 weeks later and it's not there. So then I'm back online going, okay, how do I know that this specific one I want that has the same cannabinoids and texture is the one I got 2 weeks ago at my favorite store? And inability to actually find a picture with the data that matches the jar I have in my hand, like so seemingly simple, so foundational to e-commerce, and we're still trying to solve that.
And it sounds like a lot of that is also going to be predicated initially on like your interaction with a bud tender. So is there like specific projects that your team is taking on to try to like help educate bud tenders and try to like create a collaborative relationship with your guys' data as well as like the bud tenders at individual stores? Can you kind of talk us through that relationship that Leafly has?
So love that and so grateful for that question, because yesterday was International Bud Tender Day, which is a holiday that we have been celebrating for the last 3 years. Yesterday was our third annual IBT. And it's really interesting. This is my favorite part of being out in market, out doing consumer events, out staffing our pop-ups, because the one thing's for certain, even if a consumer doesn't know who Leafly is, our bud tenders do. And I think it's because they understand the level of complexity and they need a guide. And we really think about that as an intermediary point for helping that consumer who wants to go deeper. Like, some people just want a really simple shopping experience. What should I try or buy? Just tell me I'll buy it. Worked out great. I'm going to come back and I'm going to repeat purchase that over and over again. But like, there's also, there's something really amazing about this where you're like, I've scratched the surface. Oh my goodness, there's so much more to learn. You can go down any number of rabbit holes with cannabis. And we really think about the bud tender as our partner in helping consumers down that journey. But we also think about that as that experience of walking into a dispensary is still a very high barrier for some people. It's intimidating. If you don't know anything about this, if you've never consumed cannabis and you walk into a store and you're supposed to go in and talk about some very personal things you might be challenged with your health, that's putting a lot of faith in this stranger you've just met. So we think about how can you de-risk these interaction points for consumers new to cannabis. Even if you are a regular consumer and you have that regular relationship with your bud tender, there are certain health conditions you may not want to go up to a counter and discuss, especially if there are other people in the store. And so we really think about it as sort of a mutual, healthy environment in which we can up-level the understanding of consumers so they can make smarter decisions around the plant.
How do you stay on top of the information from like a topic perspective? Just given the plethora of different interests and the different topics that you talked about today, how does your team decide on, okay, we're going to talk about cannabinoids or we're going to talk about terpenes? How do they decide on which content is most relevant to create in order to start that top of the funnel to meet the consumer where they are?
It's so hard, right? Like there's so much going on, but I think that is you've got 14 years of doing this. We have some of the most amazing subject matter experts, both on staff and as freelance. And it's about having those tentacles out. One of the things that happened with Leafly as part of COVID was really a distributed workforce. And what we've really learned from that experience is that not only is the plant unique, the plant is unique across all 50 states because imagine this product that can't cross state lines. And so you've got what's happening in industry within each state kind of driving what is the output and what's being produced and grown. And so it's that ability to have feet on the ground, right? A feedback loop We've got retailers telling us what we need to talk about. We've got brands telling us what we need to talk about. And then we just have submissions. You guys are missing the point here, right? Like, here, Leafly, you need to cover this. This is a new strain. Why is that not in your database? And I love that level of engagement of everyone else helping us understand where we may have a blind spot. So that's first and foremost, making sure we have our tentacles out in market to understand what is trending, what is hot. The other thing about being digital, however, is data, right? We see the search queries, not just on our own site, but if we think about our top of funnel, like you're not going to see us do lots of big flashy, $1 million activations. Why? Because we're actually talking to the consumer in their natural search interface, which primarily is Google. But we see what's trending and what they're searching for, and we can react accordingly. So we do leverage a ton of data understanding top of funnel and how they're making their way into Leafly. And once they get here, what's their behavior?
Then how does it work then with the brands and the partnership? Let's say, just for example, sleep. There's a ton of people searching for sleep products here locally in New York. You see a big push there. Does it now then go back to the brands and say, hey, we've got a big opportunity for a partnership here? How does that grouping work?
100%. And what we can see is where we start seeing super engaged traffic around, we had a hot spot in carts, probably midsummer, just early summer, for example, or, and let's be clear, some of the popular things, they just haven't changed over time. And, someday we should have a little meta-analysis of what does that actually mean, but it's still, right? Flour, pre-roll, concentrates, carts, and then edibles. But what did we see earlier? We saw this emergence of drinks. And can't talk about drinks if you're not talking about hemp. And we're starting to see this activation of volume. And there's a really interesting thesis here around the consumer and what does that mean? And I'm going to use my teenage kids as a sample here. We have sort of let's go California, right? Because let's go West Coast, determinant of all trends and cultural phenomena. I'm sorry, New York. But Cali sober is real, right? What happened at the start of the year? Tons of interest in Cali sober. And when you start to think about that and you have this evolution around maybe drinking's not as good for me as I thought it was, I still am looking for...
It's still fun.
I don't know if I ever thought it was good for us, but we did enjoy it.
It's still fun, but maybe it's not good for you.
I agree.
I'm Asian. I've got the lack of protein. I can't process alcohol, never was a drinker. And suddenly I have this whole emergence of cannabis brands, hemp brands that can get me a small little microdose and I feel pretty good and social. Wow. And I'm not supposed to be drinking because it's January. So you start to see the trends emerging there around what's my new New Year's resolution? I'm going to be sober for the month. Oh, great. We had so much engagement around our weed cocktails. Make them for yourself, or where can you pick them up? And so those are the kinds of trends and interests that are driving. So what might we do on the tails of that? Let's go talk to everyone who's creating drinks out there. Let us get a piece of, let us get an article out there. Let us give you our thoughts on our top 5 weed drinks. And because of the authority that Leafly has, we have some interesting opportunities as well in terms of when we're talking about hemp and how and where you can promote. We can respond to that consumer trend, make sure we're being that intermediary between the brands trying to service that and drive that connection and generate value for everyone in that system.
Got it. So just to make sure I understand correctly, it's January, California sober, which, just to make sure we're on the same page, is not drinking but consuming THC. An article goes up that says top 5 cannabis beverages for sober January. In there are 5 opportunities for brands for placements. And then what I would assume is a very, very, very valuable advertisement spot right next to that for someone looking to potentially purchase a hemp beverage. Is that kind of the fun?
That is spot on. And we've done that throughout the course of the year with both edibles and edibles for sleep. You'll see our drink stuff. And it is interesting, and I've kind of blended this conversation across THC and hemp, the ability to then think about different business models when you're working in a fully federally legal space. Also interesting opportunities. And I'll go one step further, right? And this is the divide. And what I'm really taking to heart is how do we level the playing field? How do we unify the plant? Because it's the same thing at the end of the day. And we need to align on back to that original conversation. What's the right amount of regulation to keep our consumers safe and to drive right for the legal market to win? So that's sort of like I dropped something in there that I know has this like big cloud around it.
We'll touch on
and
that
opportunity
shortly.
And opportunity. Yep.
But I'm curious about internally when you guys come up with this type of push. Does your team try the products internally? Is it like a specific division that you're like, hey,
oh yeah,
these guys all tried that? Like, how does that whole process work if it's hemp versus cannabis, I guess, right? Because like crossing state lines with hemp is easy, but the cannabis situation sounds like a little more challenging from a logistics perspective to get like your team to try all the products, if you will.
That's right. And, like I want to just point to some of the amazing coverage that David Downs does for us, longtime cannabis reporter. And David is like, you have to understand this. And I'm really not your best audience for trying and being able to opine on a specific strain. David, I know can. When he does his write-up, I know the level of fidelity has been exercised in terms of assessing how well it works. And it's interesting because our writers for some of these other articles are doing the same thing. And they're taking turns too of like, okay, who's doing this round? How are we aligning here? And how are we going to describe these things? Because I really think about this from the perspective of you've entrusted me as a consumer. You've put your trust in me to help you make a really important decision around this. It could be make or break. It could be make or break for the product. It could be make or break for the plant. So let's try and help open that up and give you as much information. I'm not going to be able to guarantee you an outcome. We all have very different systems that process cannabis differently. But again, let me give you as much information. Let me tell you what others have said. Let me give you that social proof around it. So when you go into it, you know what your range of variability is going to be, and I can give you a greater expectation of how it might be. So it is about, yes, you are, as someone who's providing that information to you, we are trying that product. We are telling you what we think so you can feel good about the decision you make.
Do you see trends with certain states, let's call them new adult use states or medical states, for the type of search trends that come in? It's
been pretty, and I'll go off the top of my head with strains traffic. You see some variability in the rising popularity of strains, but it has been pretty consistent, especially in terms of form factor. That's where I'm expecting emergence of other form factors, but there's just a consistency there in terms of people like their flower, intended consumption around it. And so that's remained remarkably consistent. It is some of the variability in strains.
Is there any data off the top of your head for trends that have surprised you?
I think it's actually not product trends, and it's the consumer purchasing trends and what they respond to. Let me give you and this is going to sound so rudimentary, but people are consuming and purchasing cannabis like regular CPG products. What does that mean? Deals. What's my discount? These are economic decisions made like any other CPG product. And it's so consistent with other e-com patterns that what it does for me is sort of debunks. We come to this and we know that this is a highly complex and different plant, and we have to have a different lens in how we bring this to market. And yet at the same time, some of these things remain consistent. Help me understand how I buy this at the lowest price, right? Where am I going to get the best service? What's my pickup time? And how am I going to have a consistent customer service experience? It's so rudimentary to be really unsexy, but I think this is where, as we're building a new industry, it's figuring out the pieces we borrow from traditional channels and figuring out the pieces that are unique. But let's not sit here trying to reinvent the wheel because we think it's cannabis and it's cannabis unique. Let's bring the best of both worlds together. And we don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting on this other side where we know what consumers want.
That has to be extremely challenging. And I would imagine that's very valuable for new states, specifically the one you're working with, New York. I'd love for you to elaborate on that partnership.
We were super excited in New York recently to launch a partnership with NICRA, which is the Cannabis Retailers Association. And I think it would be, what adjective do I want to use here without being overly offensive? I think it's missed the mark in terms of realizing its potential.
Opportunity.
That's a good way.
Nice. Needs improvement or room for improvement, I think is what they used to put on our report.
Room for improvement on the report card. Yes. It's 2024. And I'm just going to rewind the clock 4 years ago and the level of excitement we felt around the table, right? And for all of my left coast love, we know that New York plays a key role and has such an ability to actually be a really interesting balance to that West Coast centric thinking. And we had so much and that ambition for New York, right? And its mission and what it wanted to accomplish in terms of we've got some real wrongs to right. And we can, this plant can hold that potential within it. But we knew there were some things you cannot do if you want to see legalization go successfully. And we were in that market early, advocating and saying, let's not make these same mistakes. Again, let's not reinvent the wheel when we know there are things that work. And so that, we've had 4 years of that. And we're trying to partner our way to making sure that market realizes its potential by working with NICRA to promote licensed retailers in the space. What does that mean? We need more licensed retailers, period. That's what we need from the regulators, right? And then we need channels to help consumers understand the difference of shopping at licensed or unlicensed. And we want to be part of that movement, really, to help consumers shift that behavior. What is that going to require? Knowledge, convenience, and again, everything else we're used to as e-com shoppers. And this is why we went to the mat on arguing for you have to let consumers shop online. You have to let consumers order online. How do you think they were calling their guy? If I am competing with this, I need, as a licensed retailer, to be on par with the guy. And what does that mean? Digital channels. So that's really what was really behind our push and our fight in New York. And what we really want to see is by working with those licensed retailers, let us be the amplification and help continue to push that message with consumers. You've got new proposed regs around advertising regulations in New York. We're super excited about that, but we need to make sure, again, that we're not regulating and over-compliancing these operators out of existence. Let's find that middle ground. Let's find that right balance on the teeter-totter. So hopefully that gives you enough about New York.
When you were pounding the table, though, and trying to push awareness, education, you're not a plant-touching operation. So was there pushback from them saying, hey, we don't know why Leafly wants to be involved? Or were they understanding the value that your team was bringing, recognizing the fact that if they want this market to be successful, educating the consumers about where to purchase is a big portion of how to get them to channel them from the illicit stores to the licensed ones?
I'd like to think that the understanding and acknowledgement was there. But and only with 4 years of sort of looking back on this, do I think perhaps it really was. And someone asked me recently, hey, what's the biggest, and you asked a version of this. Give me a sec while this is a bit of a long-winded answer, but there's so much potential with cannabis and what you hope for it. And I think that is what, in the best light, the regulators had hoped for in structuring the market as they did, right? And there was some concern at the outset of we don't want the Amazon coming in and ruling the market, right? There's a real competition concern around, we know what's happened to other spaces where you've had online aggregators really control that. But this is not the same product. And what we tried to emphasize was we're non-plant touching. We can't transfer title. We don't actually sell you the cannabis. But goodness, those retailers need help with someone who can help them find the consumers to find them. We're an integral piece of that connection point. And so it becomes this question of how am I going to help you? How do I bring the tools, make those tools available to the people you want to see succeed? And I think it's really about reconnecting some of the logical steps of how does this actually happen in real life? Does that make sense? To ultimately make this market what it can be. because it's going to be amazing. We're just going to have to, like, we had just hoped it wasn't going to be 5 to 10 year project. We really wanted to see it out the gates, be in the multi-billion dollar market it's going to be.
I think it is though, right? And I think that, like, I know for a fact 10 years ago, I went to New York and my buddy had an app that he could purchase cannabis on, right? And so, like, I know a lot of people in New York that were able to purchase cannabis online decades ago, right? And they still now, they can do it illegally. And so, like, there's like multiple aspects associated with like the bodega thing and this whole rolling out licensed stores in New York, right? It's because everyone thinks it was like there was no industry. And now that there's a cannabis store in Manhattan, it's the one place everyone can buy cannabis, right? Essentially, it's like a giant street fight for market share from consumers and people that are following the rules from a government standpoint and having licensed regulators. So one topic I don't think we've ever like touched on actually is like, is there some sort of online state associated police force that's actively trying to hunt down like the illicit platforms that you are currently able to purchase cannabis from non-licensed storefronts in New York? Or is that just kind of something that's completely forgotten about? Like, I haven't heard anything about it. I didn't know if you're more aware of it because you're closer to the data.
No, but, interesting business idea. And like,
we talk about prosecuting.
Yes, I know. Like,
isn't that the whole point of what we're trying to do?
There's like bodegas, right, where you can walk in, but like there's apps that you can pull up and order illegal cannabis on your phone.
Yes. We don't need to talk about who set those up. I think the important aspect is understanding that I think at the end of the day, legalization is about pushing people towards these licensed stores.
Yeah.
I think the important aspect is understanding it starts with education and awareness of like, this is where you can buy tested licensed products. And I think New York has got the opportunity to improve there because there are still a ton of people around me who are unaware that there are stores here in Long Island that you can purchase licensed tested products. And it's just a matter of they don't know that.
Like, you can walk down. Every time I'm in Manhattan, I can walk down the street and I've probably got 10 stores within 3 blocks where I can buy cannabis. But I don't know it's licensed. I don't know it's tested. And the other problem is I don't actually know what licensed and tested means. Like, think about that piece. And that's what we're trying to solve. And all of that is predicated on licensing enough stores that you've got sufficient supply. Because ultimately, we're like humans we're driven on convenience. How far am I going to drive? Can they deliver the same customer service? Is it like the guy who's showing up at my doorstep? Like, that's what we're competing against. And I'm 100% aligned to, let's stop prosecuting. But I was laughing because it was like, seeing all these news reports of New York seeing such great success from padlocking unlicensed stores. Wow.
Who's paying for the padlocks?
We'll all raise our hand. Here's my $100 for a padlock. That's all it took to shut down an illicit store. It wasn't I needed to arrest and prosecute you. I just needed to put a big old padlock because guess what? A consumer's going to see that and go, oh, wait, something might not be so right about that.
I'll just walk down 2 more streets and go to the next one.
I want to just go back to your idea, Kellen, of like, who's policing this online? And here's one of the great, like, this is such an industry that has so many, like, oxymorons. As a licensed non-plant touching company, I can't really educate you about cannabis on any Meta app.
Nope.
Every time I post something, I'm at risk of getting shut down. But my goodness, I've got a message every day in my Instagram around, do I want to buy weed? And here are the photos of nugs. Like, just think about how silly and absurd and a little bit crazy that is. And how do we solve that? I think that's like not the online digital police, but how do we solve some of these like things that we all look at as just common sense people and go, this is so absurd.
What are some of those conversations like when you, as a non-plant touching business, trying to push education for medical purposes? Like, what's that conversation with Meta like when they're like, no, go kick rocks. Like, we don't want anything to do with you. Like,
it would require a conversation. Right?
Have you been able to get a hold of someone at Meta?
Not yet.
Suck at meta.com.
Hey, Mark,
not yet.
Mark Zuckerberg, listening.
Who woke up? Right, exactly.
He's a fan of the podcast.
Right. Like, and like massive organizations, right? Like, you don't know which reviewer you got stuck in, which moderator picked up your file, picked up your account. Where did you get swept up on what issue? And like, just think about that magnified across all the gatekeepers on the internet. That's what the entire industry is dealing with. And I think about us as a technology company, as a consumer marketplace, and we are way at to your point, we're not plant touching, we're not actually selling anything to consumers. We are like way better off than so many. And what I had heard just even last week, that there was a massive roundup and operators getting locked out of their Instagram accounts.
Sick.
They just put us all together, same, but different is how they group it. So we teased it before, but we got to talk hemp versus cannabis, right? We understand it might be the same plant and might have some small characteristic differences, but it's handled completely differently. How does your team handle that incoming information, then disseminate the information accurately back towards the users so at least they have an understanding of the differences?
This is one area where I actually think, and let me just back up 2 steps. This idea of hemp, it's not new, right? And, as long as I've been here, hemp and hemp brands have been a core part of our platform. Why is that? Think about 2019, rewind the clock, CBD, biggest thing since sliced bread. And then you've got your Delta 8s and your alternative cannabinoids that people are figuring out, because people are really smart. We can figure out how to do things once we know what the rules are. And so hemp has always been part of our ecosystem, but it's really this emergence over the last 18 months, I would say, of really being able to emulate effects through Delta 9 derivatives from hemp. And you're going head to head, especially on edibles and drinks, and the ability to derive isolates and create consumer products on the basis of that. But I think about this a lot from our mission of helping consumers navigate their journeys through cannabis. And that journey is going to look qualitatively different depending on where you are in this country. And you guys, we're all in licensed markets, right? You know where your licensed store is. You've got delivery. You both have delivery. I don't have delivery. But I know where I'm going to go based on what I want to consume at any given time. But if I'm in Texas, that experience is qualitatively different. And my ability to educate you about your options, qualitatively different. Well, my ability to offer you very different things, qualitatively different. And so that's where I think the divide starts to happen. And right now we have what I see is what is qualitatively likely the same product and likely the same outputs, but produced at different levels of quality standards, at different levels of compliance standards. That's not good. That's not good for anyone. Before we even get to whether that's competitively fair or not. But at the same time, if I don't have access to a licensed store or delivery provider, I want you to have access to that plant. I want you to have access to whoever can provide you the service you need. How can I get you there? And I'm really thinking about, for us right now, we're looking at, especially in these markets where they have no licensed cannabis to speak of, and we're talking about, states that have no real medical program. How can we better connect you with the retailers and brands that do carry products that you can have access to? And ultimately, it's about how can we do that with the education and information to make sure you can get access to safe products, to tested products. And I think it's about unifying around what do we want for our consumers out of this plant? How do we keep them safe?
Is that about investing in education from like hemp-derived style products so that when people from Texas or other...
100%. And look at every hemp online DTC brand today. They spend a ton of time and effort explaining, why is it this can show up on my doorstep? Wait, how is this different from the product? Like, think about the level of confusion around why is that experience so different? And I buy out of both. Like, I like certain hemp drinks that I can't get at my licensed store, so I am mail ordering those. And they'll show up in a brown box at my front doorstep, and I have to drive to pick up my carts at my local store. Like, why is that so different? I have a law degree that helps me navigate why that's different. I'm not sure most consumers do. How can we unlock that? And how can we give that to them from a source that's not the brand themselves? Because that will drive that consumer confidence.
What is the dynamic with like dispensaries that are actively paying all these bills to sell these products that from a promotion perspective, right, in those specific states versus like legal states, right? Like how does Leafly handle that dichotomy of a retail store that's say selling maybe like a Keef Cola or another beverage that is derived from a cannabis plant versus consumers in that same state could go online and purchase a hemp beverage that's essentially the same product, but they can get it shipped to their store. Like, is there any like place that Leafly has within that like decision tree in terms of like supporting your guys' customers to try to drive like traffic to the marijuana dispensary? Like, I know it's a tough situation, but I'm just curious, you know?
I love how you really laid out the potential conflict and the need for balance, right? And I think about that as the retailers and brands sustain this platform and we give them due respect and really acknowledge the conditions that they're operating under, and they are hard, right? How many we talk about this regularly. How many operators are actually profitable? You know, the cost they carry to try and operate in a fully compliant licensed state so high, and an hemp provider doesn't do that. At the same time, we aren't delivering against that consumer mission unless we help them understand what their options are and what the differences are. But ultimately, you know, you'll see we're going to make mistakes on both sides of this, and we're going to hear from people. We're going to hear from our retailers and brands who say, and this has happened, hey, this isn't fair. And you're right. Let me change this and let me help drive that clearer distinction for the consumer. But ultimately, our job is to provide that information, to provide that ability for a consumer to discern and make that choice for themselves between the channels they choose to purchase in.
Should dispensaries be able, like, and this is just a personal question, but like, I can go in a dispensary and buy a shirt, right? I can go in and buy chapstick. They have other knickknacks, right? Which essentially are consumer packaged goods.
Yep. Could
they also just sell hemp beverages as well?
Wouldn't that be amazing?
I mean, but actually, like, can they? Right? Like, what's the difference? You see what I'm saying?
State by state. And it's funny that you asked this question because I'm, part of my This
is the lawyer question.
This is the lawyer question. And I'm just going to use the Washington State example. Because I was on a town hall. We're members of the Cannabis Alliance, our local trade group here in the state of Washington, and do a fair amount of just my serve on their Equity and Justice Committee and really, align to their mission of an equitable and fair industry. And, in Washington State, licensed retailers cannot sell hemp-derived products. And there is a movement right now saying, hey, how can I compete when you won't let me carry these products on my shelves? But that's what we're talking about. Like, if we can take the energy of trying to take each other out, we're actually building the regulatory rules of the road so that we're competing on level ground. That's what we need to be after. How do we get there? That's like my total personal opinion of like wanting to fix the system. But that's where that friction comes in, and it's totally understandable. And how are we going to navigate that over the course of us figuring it out over the next several years? Because think about if we don't take that approach, we're trying to criminalize the plant again. Like all of this work, the 20 years of actual license of legalized cannabis, plus the 60 years before that. Like we are doing such a disservice to that advocacy effort. And you're going to, you're like every other issue. It's so rich. You're going to find so many different opinions along that spectrum. But that is my own personal view around what do we do to unify this plant and stop using it as a weapon against one another.
I think that was perfectly said. And I think you said it so simplistically that it makes sense. And it's unfortunate that we're unable to internalize that and then make sound decisions based on that statement.
Pretty words. No, it defies
straightforward. That was as straightforward as you can get. So
it's like in a perfect world, they should like someone be able to go online to one of these websites and like if they want the beverage, the Delta 9 beverage, it should just be an option to be like, oh, well, this product we can ship to your house. But like you know what I mean? Like that's simple code. Like,
isn't that amazing? Yeah.
And like, no, we're not allowed to do that.
Take a look at the Leafly website. Tell me what you think on our
nice little plug there.
Yeah.
Well, and look, you know what we've seen over the last 6 months, major brands, major established licensed brands and operators introducing their hemp-based lines. And you know that's sort of an acknowledgement of reality. What is it going to take for us to survive? Like think about like brands have the hardest time. And why has it been so hard for brands to emerge? Because what other product has to be created from scratch in each state? Like brand is about trust, and trust is about consistency. And how do you deliver on that brand prop in our license structure? And so like, I think about the efficiency of the brand marketing dollars spent, and it's so inefficient if you cannot do this at scale. And I think what you're seeing is a bunch of brands and producers saying, how do we drive the efficiencies of scale that allow us to become profitable? We really have to make this step into hemp. And so like you're seeing them really step carefully into trying, you know, at a brand level, trying to do what I'm describing here, which is I'm going to meet the consumer where they are, because where they are is very different.
Yeah.
So you're saying Pepsi doesn't have individual bottling plants in all the states?
I have this little efficiency piece. It's really like a massive part of like when I see this level of efficiency, it's like I wasted energy. It drives me insane.
So hard.
It's wild.
So hard. All right. Slightly switching gears. What don't we know about Leafly?
You're going to have to edit my deep sigh and like.
Those are important.
I know. No, I mean, there's so much I want you to know about Leafly. And then like, I think and I guess I'm feeling pretty introspective about the last several years because it's been a tough couple of years. It's also sort of tied to what we've seen in this industry. And we were talking earlier about 2020 and our ambition for New York, and just rewind the clock to 2020 and our ambition for the industry. And sort of the election season just allows us to sort of reflect back on that point. And like, this is an industry that goes up and down. The capital inflows and our ability to, like, our basic existential survival is tied to money in this space. And here we are. And like, we ride the wave with every single operator and consumer. We are on that journey with you. And like, I feel like we're at this really interesting point of, do we have cause for optimism? We've had it so beaten out of us as an industry. Do we have that cause for optimism, especially as we sort of look at ourselves, 4 years later? And I think that's my long-winded way of saying, I think we can, Colin, you started us with, you were my place to go.
And I want to caveat that I am not an operator anymore. So I don't have the task of going through determining if a strain is hybrid indica or sativa to make the menu work. So that is why I'm not, that's why I said it like I do. Okay. But continue. Sorry.
And as I'm sort of sitting in this reflective moment, I see so many signs of cause for optimism. I am so deeply inspired by the industry as a whole, inspired by the people here who have been committed to this mission of helping consumers discover cannabis, and sitting at the space of saying, it's easy to write us off. It's easy to write this industry off, but we have cause for optimism. I've seen so many companies survive some of the hardest times here. Bet on us. Bet on cannabis. We're going like, that's where I think it's more really a existential, who are we and what are we going to do? Because I've never felt more than a calling back to our mission of, we have to help consumers discover cannabis. And that, because of the complexity, and we just talked about this hemp branch, we've got more states. We've got 2 presidential candidates who are about to make who have committed to big shifts in federal policy around that. We're going to need to explain this all over again. Like, everyone get back up on it. It's been rough, but here we go. We all need to be a part of this, helping this move this along. So that's sort of a very meta response to your question about Leafly. But the reality is we're still here answering those consumer questions, providing that important information. And you're going to see this evolution in digital e-commerce over the course of the next several years. And we're a critical part of that. And we're going to help consumers find what they're looking for and connect them to the retailers and brands that serve them.
Dream smoking session, 3 people, dead or alive.
I know this is your textbook question. And the first thought that came to me was Rasputin.
What's the first?
Gandhi. And that one was and ask me another question. I want to come back to the third.
What question do you wish more people asked you?
It's an interesting one because I can answer that one personally. I can answer that one on behalf of Leafly, I feel like.
The first thing that came to mind.
I think it's the first one that came to mind was, it's a Leafly question. And I think it's a question of why we exist, right? Why is a Leafly necessary for this space? And why I wish people asked about that more is because it opens up this opportunity to share history about this plan. And that history has determined why we are where we are today. And if you do not have an appreciation for everything from the cultural, historical, medicinal foundations of this plant, the 100 Years' War to suppress it, and now this journey we've been on to legalize it and bring it back into circulation, you can't understand why it's so hard for a retailer or a brand. You can't understand why it's so hard for a consumer. And you can't understand why then a Leafly is necessary to answer and help solve some of those biggest challenges. That's a question I wish people asked me more. This one's going to come a bit out of left field. And I've answered this before in the context of which female leaders do you admire. And one of the former PepsiCo CEOs, Indra Nooyi, was part of their transformation when, do you remember the war on sugar? And it still is happening. But she was leading a leading soda company through the transition of the war on sugar. And how do you carry a brand? How do you carry an organization? How do you carry an industry and mindset shift through that? And I just heard her speak multiple times on that. And it was that part of being able to just have a smoke test and go deep on really understanding that's you know what I mean? Growing a business is one thing, but changing hearts and minds, that is. And I think that's sort of why I picked those others at the table of we are in the mission of changing hearts and minds and understanding that process and how to navigate other individuals. How do you inspire to achieve those outcomes? That's what I want to learn out of those conversations.
That's a great group. All right. Prediction time. Yoko, with Leafly's unique position as a marketplace, what emerging consumer trend do you foresee shifting the minds?
It's baseline momentum. And I don't care what anyone says, changing the laws is a critical part of changing stigma. And when I take a step back and reflect on the last 5 years, and earlier this spring I spent just before 420 was in Germany. And they went, I'll call it rec legal light, starting in April. And it's going to be slow and it's going to be messy. And, you've got advocates who are so frustrated that they don't have a rec market up and running. But think about the significance of a Germany going legal. Think about what that tips in terms of the dominoes. And we're going to get there. We're going to get there when 50 states in this country have access to legal cannabis. And you've got international movement to finally acknowledge, yes, not everyone should have access to this plant, but let's get it in the hands of the people who need it most and who can use this safely. That's where we're going to be. And the innovation just goes from there. So don't underestimate the power of that, because it is a hearts and minds game. And then it's about education to navigate you through each step of that journey.
Well said. Kellen?
I think I'm going to kind of take a similar approach, but I think hemp beverages, I think that just the ability to meet the consumer where they're at, like Yoko was saying, right? Most individuals who ingest something that alters your perception of reality from an intoxicating perspective consume it via beverage or something to eat like a pill. And from a recreational kind of mainstream intoxicating perspective, beverages seem to be the core way. And hemp has found a way to deliver Delta-9 THC to any consumer in any state across the country, and they can just have it show up at their doorstep. So I think the power of that is it really provides everyone who is kind of on the fence about legalization or the law changing or anything like that. It provides a safe method for them to consume the product in the safety of their own home, which then ultimately will show and prove people, right? Like proofs in the pudding is that it isn't the devil's lettuce. It isn't all that was kind of talked up about it for the last 100 years. And that's my opinion. What do you think, Brian?
Personalization. I think the moment we can get some first-person data where I can get products for creativity, for sleep, for exercise, for relaxing, and I know I can deliver and I can maybe raise the intensity in certain ones, it would be a game changer. And I think once people can feel extremely confident with the outcomes that they're looking to kind of facilitate that feeling for, I think you can really level up the next degree. And I think Leafly's got a tremendous first-person advantage just based on the information and its status in the industry, and excited to kind of see as the information unfolds. And hopefully we'll get some more personalization going forward. And that means I know I'm on the right track.
Appreciate that plug, Brian, and that's spot on, right? That is the one thing about education and trust is about the information you get back in turn, and the willingness of this community that sustains Leafly to share those experiences are foundational to building the first-person personalization engines that we just have continued opportunity to essentially iterate upon.
100%. So Yoko, for our listeners, they want to get in touch, they want to learn more, where can I find you?
First and foremost, leafly.com, download our app, both Google App Store and Google Play Store. And I'm active on LinkedIn. I'm active on X. Send me a note. Would love to hear from you.
Thanks for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much.